Okay, so today we're going to look at brace Farley, and apologies because there might be some noise in the background. I've got a fan on, I've got the window open because it's absolutely boiling here. So if you are out doing your standing, there's this thing Wang Xiangjai says about doing your standing in the sunshine because it has this it has this quality of clearing away all the bacteria, whatever the word is, antiseptic or something like that. But it also has the quality of giving you cancer, so do be aware of that when you're out, obviously. But I was thinking particularly because I was out the other day, I wasn't even standing, I was just walking the dog, but this has happened before, where I just get attacked by those biting insects. My chi is not enough to repel them, I'm afraid. And it made me think of my coach was talking about when he was training with his teacher, when he was like, a young man. And he was saying like they're doing standing in the sunshine, and of course he couldn't, could only speak spoke Mandarin but only spoke a little bit of English, and he was mimicking like the flies, like the mosquitoes biting their arms, and saying, the flies were biting like this and we didn't dare move, if you move you get whacked, proper Chinese coaching style, which I've seen myself, and should say, by the way, I don't necessarily agree with that. But they didn't dare move, and so these insects are biting them, but I'm afraid I can't go along with that. If I'm doing my standing and insects start biting me, I can't bear it. And also it speaks a little bit to this thing about people think like you've broken the magic spell if you move or put your arms down or something like that. It doesn't make any difference, really. It's, you need a certain amount of time, as I've said before, for the kind of levels of relaxation to start kicking in, and that really interesting thing where you think you're relaxed and then muscles relax even further, and you usually feel that in your knees most of all. But you won't immediately lose that just because you stop and just waft off an insect that's sucking your blood and your vital chi out of you. I like to think that those flies that produce a line of flies that are of exceptional quality, of strength and vigour due to the chi that they've taken from my veins. But no, I can't bear it, I can't stand that. So do be careful out in the sunshine. There again, I could be long dead when you're listening to this, and it could be winter, so beware of the snow as well. As a young wushu student, I was out walking with my senior brother one day, and it had been snowing, it was ice, all the pavements were iced up, and we both stepped onto this patch of ice on the pavement, and we both slid like 5 metres down this, holding our posture. We managed to just slide to the end of it and carry on walking, and my senior brother turned to me and said, if either of us had slipped over, then we would have never lived it down. All that training and you just slip over on a mere bit of ice. So yeah, if it's icy, be careful as well. Well, it's turning into the waffling tray show, isn't it? Anyway, what we're going to look at today is brace Farley. So we've looked at gap Farley, and brace Farley is when you've got your structure on the opponent's structure. So you've got your weight braced against, so they've got their weight braced against you, and this changes the nature of how you have to use Farley. And I should say, I don't want to labour the point, but if you think you've got magic powers, like a lot of people apparently do, then it doesn't really matter, does it, whether someone's leaning on you, whether there's a gap, because the thing that's going to have the effect is some kind of magic force. And I can't be bothered getting into all this stuff anymore, like we're arguing about it, and whatever gets you up, whatever keeps you going, whatever gets you through the night, if you believe in all that, what does it matter? What difference does it make to anyone else? But if you want actual... Oh, and also the other thing is, like, if it doesn't matter whether there's a gap, it doesn't matter whether the opponent's weight is on you, then it also doesn't matter whether the opponent is an elephant, does it? You should be able to zing them back with your magic chi force, whichever way it is, so it doesn't matter at all. But for those who want practical skill, which ultimately is far more interesting, and like believing in all that magic chi stuff, all that kind of Adam Misner nonsense, it's like admitting that there's nothing of value in Chinese physical culture. It's like erasing millennia of development in advanced physical movement skill, and just that's appalling. And to think that it's the people who make the biggest song and dance, pretending that they are the ones who are the guardians of Chinese physical culture, who promote all that stuff, is just, as Wang Shengjai would say, makes you feel sick for 10 days. There again, to be honest, I'll talk about this another time, but to me it's the people who do that kind of practical Chinese martial arts are in many ways far worse than the Wu people. It's the people who just say, oh yeah, it should just look like boxing. That's far more dangerous in the long run to the preservation of the principles of Chinese physical culture. That's a far more dangerous direction that things have taken, particularly in the West. Anyway, that's a whole other story I'll come back to another time. So just to recap, brace fairly is when you have your opponent's weight pushing against you or you're pushing against them. That can happen in all different kinds of ways, and it can happen in ways that leave you with only like a very limited number of options in terms of release force. Particularly if someone's got hold of you, you can't really necessarily change very easily into something else if you want to immediately release force. In terms of brace fairly particularly, you have to release force with the part of the body that's pushing against them. Otherwise it would be gap fairly. You bring in another part of the body in to do it. And if you want to react very fast or you're held in place, then you have to do it with that part of the body. So you have to understand a range of different ways of using this, and you have to practice it very diligently. So the only other thing I want to say in terms of preamble is to look very carefully, and you'll see that when we use brace fairly, obviously we, as I've talked about before, I don't want to rehearse it, but we bring the movement back into the body because there isn't that gap there. But to do that, we change the ratio of the contexts that we're using. So where you might have a posture that's like 90-95% just using open, it changes to something like 70% open, 30% rise, and that's if you're pushing forwards or up. If you're pushing down, then you change the context ratio so that you include more sink. So it might be like, 80% open and 20% sink. It all depends. There's always the reality of the context of the movement. For example, you don't want to over lean forward or something like that, and that might affect how much sink you use or something like that. But generally speaking, we create these bigger movements that create these bigger kind of open, wider movements that you'll be able to see pretty clearly. So instead of it being like, it's still a short, sharp movement overall, but because we add in either sink or rise, it kind of looks like a bigger, more rounded movement. And also I'll point out, the very different kind of effects that you get for a very similar amount of power between brace fairly and gap fairly. Alright, so we know that for gap fairly we need a tiny little bit of space in which we can accelerate the whole body structure, and what's really interesting about that is it can be a really, really small space. And you can see here I've got my hand on the bag, and that's a technique that we use to practice that. It's like a guide, like your hand's just touching on someone, but their weight isn't pressed against you, so it's not brace fairly. And even though there's only like, what is it there, like an inch or 2 inches between the hit point and the target, nevertheless you can get this effect if you use gap fairly. You can see that I cheated it a little bit there and pulled my arm back, and that's the principle of your intent being a dog. Like it will only just follow one instruction, and that's maximise power, so you've always got to be mindful of everything else that you want to make it do. Anyway, even so, from a very small space of movement, you can see how much power can be generated from that posture. It's not easy to do, but on the other hand, it's the easiest thing in the world to do. It's always the paradox of each one. Now let's compare it with brace fairly, and what you want to do with this first of all is take the weight, a little bit of the weight at first, and then when you're a bit more advanced you can push right in and take much more weight to build up the weight that you're pushing against. But you take the weight of the bag first so you feel it pushing down into your structure, and then you release force, but it's a different kind of movement. You've got to articulate everything because you haven't even got that tiny little bit of a gap. All of that's got to be put back into your body like a wave that moves through the whole body and then issues force at the hit point. And you can see some technical imperfections there. I'd rather my hand didn't drop so much after the initial initial push. So filming yourself is a good way to see these things that you can work on, but there'll always be these little technical imperfections. But the important thing is to notice now the difference between these two techniques, which use a very similar amount of power. So let's look at them again and see the difference, and then we'll talk about why that difference is there. So you could see pretty clearly there that the brace Farley, the second one, really slams the bag back into the backing at the back. And so obviously if that backing wasn't there, it would go much further than that. It would swing right back. Whereas with the gap Farley, it's exhausted its swing before it even hits the backing. And that's because they're very different kinds of transmission of force, or as some people might say, a little bit obscurely, different kinds of energy. Whatever the laws of physics that are involved, when you hit with a short, sharp movement, it kind of folds the bag a little bit in the middle. Very often it will jump up on its chain or something like that. It won't just be pushed straight forward, backwards with gap Farley. And that's because the way the hit hits in, the energy dissipates into the bag rather than just push it. It does push it back, but not in the same way that brace Farley slams it backwards. With brace Farley, all the energy is pushing backwards. Everything is going backwards. There's none of that impact energy, so it's two very different ways of doing it. And I did wonder about that myself when I first saw it, particularly that kind of double push where you see someone lifted and launched. And I was thinking, what's the connection here with, like I understand Farley with a punch or something like that, but then how do you get that effect when you want to launch someone like that? And I didn't realise there was these two different kinds of Farley. It took me a while to learn about that, as it does with everyone. And then the next thing that you realise, and it's usually about the time you come to do push hands, that you start really needing brace Farley. And the next conundrum is, well, we usually use these different kinds of routing where the front foot moves. Particularly with the basic kinds of pushes, you're used to like scrape routing or fishtail routing, something like that. And then when you use brace Farley, you try and do the same thing, which is understandable. So you either have to work it out or it has to be pointed out to you that it's actually different. So here's the first thing. First of all, as you can see here, you take the weight. And of course we need to be able to do these dynamically in a dynamic environment. That's why we use push hands, to start building up that skill of using it dynamically. But we build step by step. We use template postures, and you can do this against a person, but you need to do so much repetition. It's not the sort of thing you really want someone to stand there being a dummy while you do this on them, because it really hurts. So a bag of decent heaviness is required, and not one of these much lighter bags. Lighter bag, okay, for initially learning the technique, but you need to feel the weight, and the reason for this is the way that it creates a compression set. So the moment you take the weight, the first thing you will feel is it all pushed down on the lead leg. Now this isn't the same for every posture. It depends on what kind of posture it is and what context you're using. This posture uses open, and it's very much like a jab or a hook or a cross, and it's pushing straight back. So it creates a compression set down on the lead foot. And the more weight you take, the more it's going to limit what you can do with your foot. So I prefer to do pivot route. Like, there's no rules. It's just what can you scientifically justify given the circumstances. So I prefer to do a pivot route for this kind of exercise. But if someone has all their weight bearing down on you, you can't even do a pivot route. But what you absolutely shouldn't do is a scrape routing where like the foot goes, just scrapes forward a couple of Chinese inches and back. And not just for the reasons that we looked at when we did the video on the lead forearm gap Farley, not just for that reason, but with these brace Farley postures, once you've got all the weight on the leg, the last thing you want to do is start like trying to move it a little bit forwards or backwards or side to side with like kind of scrape routing. The potential for the weight that's been put down to distort that. To lift it up is fine if you can get enough on it to do a bit of a pivot route is fine, but to do like a scrape routing where you try and shift it forwards fast a couple of inches, the way the weight is pushing down can distort that. It makes it really difficult anyway, so it throws off all your timing, the way the posture is stacked, and the way it's interlinked with the hip point, that's all thrown off, but it's also really dangerous. The extra weight can force it to slip out from under you. So the best you can do is just kind of lift up into a pivot root, push straight back down into the floor. And you do very much feel when you do this that it sets very much more on the front foot than it does on the rear foot, but the rear foot also plays a key role in the set, obviously, the way that it's interlinked back into the ground. And you can see the whole posture lifts up off the floor. When you do things fast, you don't maintain that connection to the floor, so that kind of superstitious stuff people talk about, constantly maintaining connections to the floor, actually the laws of physics don't work like that. And when you move very, very fast, it doesn't matter. That's all explosive energy moving forward into the posture. But you'll feel that compression set down into the lead leg, and you'll feel it push from the rear foot. And of course you're using open and rise. And then the final point of the posture is, as you can see here, and you can really see here what we mean when we say a posture is stacked, and why we use that word stacked, or why we translate that word as stacked. And you can also clearly see what we mean by a posture being connected or disconnected. So if you look from the feet to the knees to the hips, then to the torso, the shoulder, and then the lead arm, everything is at the maximum point it can be to support that lead arm, to get it as far out as possible while it's still connected to the overall structure. So it's like boxes that have been stacked one on top of the other, each one just a little bit overlapping as far as it can possibly go, maintaining its structure. And that's also why the lead leg is so important in that structure. Now there's one final point to think about, and that's the idea of curtailing movements, which we've looked at quite a lot in the beginner series. Critical idea within Yiquan. And this is the idea that even if the target wasn't there, the posture would stop here. So when we do gap Farley, the object itself stops like at an intermediate level, you should be able to stop it yourself. So even if you miss the target, you would stop. But it's not always quite like that in reality. And that's something, by the way, when you watch people do bag work, look out for that. What happens when they miss? If they miss and swing wild, then you know that their level's not that high. Or if they continually do it, the level isn't that high. Someone who can miss and recover very quickly has a higher level. But curtailed movement, where we hit to the stop point, usually something like the centre line, we hit and stop, our key critical idea. That's a key skill that links all of each one together for everything that we've looked at in the beginner series. With a gap Farley, the target itself does a massive part of the job of stopping the posture and contailing it. With brace Farley, you're usually pushing through the target, so the target itself will ping forwards. It won't have that resisting energy to stop the movement, so your ability to curtail the posture has to be a lot higher to do brace Farley without falling over. So all of that said, let's have a look at the demonstration. For the rear hand version, obviously we're going to use close, but remember that we do this on an angle, so it's going to be on an angle relative to our body. It's not going to be straightforward, because that would disconnect the structure by using too much close. It would make it imbalanced by squeezing everything in too much on one line. So we do it at an angle out to the side, just like we do with the rear hand elbow, unless you change the footwork, but that's very difficult to do with brace Farley, so it's done out on an angle to the side. And that changes the way the posture is set slightly, and you can try this yourself, that it will push down much more into your lead foot, which is unusual for a posture that uses close. So the way we compensate for this is you have to lean into this posture a little bit more. And it's the same for the other one, actually, by the way, when you see that the posture is stacked to its maximum, that if someone catches you while you do it, if they hold on to you and pull you in, they can pull you off balance fairly easily. But it's like these things you see online where this, whatever posture someone does, someone else says, oh yeah, but they could kick you in the balls. It's like, yeah, well, if you've got balls, you can always be kicked in them. That's the reality. So you've got to do something. The Sun Tzu says at a certain point, you know, the army has to make a move, you have to attack. So what we do is we lean in with this posture. So you've got to get it just right. Don't over lean in. When the person pings back or the bag pings back, you don't want to fall forwards. You still want to feel relatively strong. But for a split second, you have to lean in and push all your weight back onto your lead foot, not the rear foot. So again, that's something you have to feel. So all of these things you've got to feel. But let's have a look at the demonstration. Oh, and by the way, watch carefully. You can see clearly here the way the posture uses close and rise, just like the lead hand version uses open and rise. So it helps you understand this idea of the ratios of contexts and understanding what those ratios are and intuitively learning the correct ratios. Okay, let's take a look. And just to finish off, there's lots of exercises you can do around this, and of course there's plenty of exercises you can develop yourself. There's no fixed curriculum. It's all an expanding curriculum, the infinite curriculum. But one exercise that I do with these postures is swinging the bag and then using the posture, and this creates a different sense of timing because you can't just brace, you've got to feel the weight of the posture, feel the weight of the bag coming in and the effect of that on the posture, so it slows down the posture a little bit. But, you know, here's a quick example.